Yeah. Hi. Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's really lovely. I was part of the founding of this Sangha and haven't been around so much in recent history. And it's just so amazing to watch this Sangha develop and grow. It's really satisfying. So thank you for having me back. Well, we're starting a practice period, and I'm here to kind of get that going. I'm going to cover several things tonight related to the practice period. I'm going to talk about what a practice period is. I'm going to give us some history so that we can better understand why we're going to do this practice period, and also some history about the content of the practice period. Specifically, who the Buddha was, what the Buddha taught, and how those teachings eventually came to us. Because they've gone to different parts of the world differently, so how did this happen for us? And then finally, I'll talk about how to practice this heart of the Buddha's teaching, this practice period. How do we do that together? And I'll talk about using the book that we're going to all use, and that using the book for our intellectual understanding, but I'm also going to talk about using our heart so that we can gain our own insight from what we're practicing. We're not just repeaters of what everyone else has practiced before. We have our own insights and way to practice. I want to encourage that. So, does that sound like okay? So, good place to go? Okay. Well, the first question I think that we probably is coming up, at least for me, well, why do a practice period? What is this thing? Why would we do it? A living practice is sort of like the living earth. The living earth has cycles. So it has a cycle of growth, and that's followed by a cycle of abundance and harvest, and then that's followed by a cycle of rest. And the earth has been doing this for a long, long time. And our practice is like that too. We have periods of really intense practice, so that's our growth, like the earth. And we have periods of harvest from that intensity, that would be our insights that come from our practice. And then we have periods of rest, where we can integrate what's gone on in our practice, and we can tend to our bodies. And without these cycles in our practice, I think our practice is at risk of becoming stale and withering. If we don't have those cycles of deepening, insight, and rest, it's really easy to grab on to a particular practice and think, this is it, this is the one, and do that over and over and over again until it loses its freshness and it just becomes something rote. It becomes an orthodoxy. It's not alive. So we have these cycles where we really go deep, and then we practice that with those insights, and then we rest. And we start again. So it keeps it fresh. It keeps it alive, just like the Earth's cycles keeps the natural environment alive and fresh. Now, our Zen practice cycles include a number of elements. I'm just going to kind of name them so we have an overview of what we're doing. We have our daily individual practice. So that's where we sit at home on our cushion every day. And that can yield us a kind of constancy and spaciousness. It's a really important element. And then once a week, we come together as a Sangha. And that's an important practice element too, because it gives us this sense of community, this sense of interbeing that you don't get at home in the dark on your cushion. Another element would be our retreats. We do 1 or 2 retreats a year, and those are really lovely for deepening and getting intensity to our practice and a kind of a withdrawal from our normal busyness and all those pressures of our daily life. And retreats are also great for building spiritual friendships. Some of my best friends I have practiced with at retreat for a long, long time. Another element is a practice period like this. It's a time for us as a community to take one aspect of the Dharma and look really deeply into it together, not as individuals, but as a Sangha. And then this last element of our practice is rest. Really important element. We do days of mindfulness for rest. It gives us physical rejuvenation, gives us a chance to integrate. So that's kind of the elements of our practice. And practice periods fit into all of that. And that's what we're moving into now as a practice period. So this period of intense practice as a community. And that's what a practice period really does for us. And the next question you might ask, well, okay, so that's a practice period. How do you benefit from a practice period? How do you do this in a way that actually yields fruit for you or for us as a Sangha? Well, a practice period focuses on one facet of the Dharma jewel. If you think of the Dharma as being a beautiful diamond with many, many, many facets, we're going to pick one facet and look really deeply into that facet. And we don't have a lot of opportunity to do that unless we do this together as a group. And when I say there's lots of facets to the Dharma, you look at the sutras, for instance, there are thousands of sutras. Thousands. We have our sutra book, it's about that thick, but there are buildings full of the sutras, carved into wood blocks. And very few of them have been translated into English. So we have a kind of a small part of the Dharma that's actually come to us. And in addition to thousands of sutras, there are thousands of practices that we could do. The Buddha taught 2,600 years ago, and everything that the Buddha taught was then orally transmitted on to others, and the practices multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. And how do we know which one we're going to do? How do we figure that out? You can see some of this proliferation of the practices if you look just in our thin sutra book. You can see that there are lists in those sutras. Have you noticed this? The 5 remembrances, the 3 refuges, all these things with numbers and lists. And there's also sutras that have these repeating phrases in them. They say things like in the Discourse of Happiness, at the end of each stanza, this is the greatest happiness. The next stanza, this is the greatest happiness. And we tend to chant and sing all those sutras because that's how they were remembered at first. And all this stuff has come down to us, and it can be a little bit confusing. How do we know which to do and where to focus? But luckily, it's really lovely when we look at one facet of the Dharma deeply, we look at the whole Dharma. So it doesn't matter, you don't have to think you've got to walk into those enormous rooms in Korean monasteries full of 84,000 woodcuts with sutras on them. You can just pick up one facet and look deeply enough that you know the Dharma. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to do that together so that we can really benefit from the Dharma. I learned about this just in the last few months in a new way, looking deeply into one aspect of the Dharma. I chose one sutra to recite every morning before I get out of bed, and it's the 5 remembrances. It's in our sutra book, and you probably are familiar with it. And it's so lovely. Before I get out of bed, as soon as I open my eyes in the morning, I recite it. I won't recite the whole thing here now, but what's happened for me in reciting that is that sutra is now so available to me to use in my everyday life, and I'm seeing it everywhere. And it gives me this lens through which to practice the Dharma. So one of the aspects of that one is I'm of the nature to grow old. Well, so every time now I see something changing in my body, I say, oh, I'm of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. Something goes wrong with my body, I get sick, and I think, oh, I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape having ill health. I see my friends and my relatives die, and I know immediately, I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. So this is just one facet of the Dharma that I'm kind of bringing up because it's what I've been practicing with, but it's so lovely to have that as this lens that I can see into the Dharma with. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to find a lens for ourselves using this wonderful book by Thich Nhat Hanh, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching. So I really want to encourage us all to embrace this practice period. To give yourself over to the deep study of this facet of the Dharma. Because it is your opportunity now to do this with this group of people, with this Sangha. And just like I've been experiencing the joy of practicing the facet of the 5 remembrances, you get to practice the facet of this book, this wonderful book that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote. And I trust that you will be transformed by this. If you give yourself deeply, you will be transformed. And the depth of your dedication directly correlates to the depth of your transformation. I'll say that again. The depth of your dedication directly correlates to the depth of your transformation. Give yourself a little bit to it, you'll transform a little bit. Give yourself deeply to it, you'll transform deeply. So please, show up fully for this practice period. Read the part that you're reading that week. Really live with that part. Come and join the Sangha when the Sangha is discussing it. Be here. Show up. And I really trust that if you bring that depth, you will be rewarded with a transformation that is also deep. And I say this because I have done the opposite. I have done the opposite. I have not gone deeply into what the Sangha was doing sometimes, and I regret that. I'm looking at my life now as I enter my older years, and I'm realizing how precious every moment is. And I threw moments away in my youth, and I just don't want that for you. I really don't want you to have that regret that you've thrown away this moment that's with you now to practice this practice period deeply. Well, please give yourself that gift. So that's kind of the context of a practice period, why we do it, what it is, how to benefit from it. I want to talk just a little bit about the content of the practice period. I'm not going to talk a lot about that because that's pretty much what you're going to focus on over the next weeks. But I do want to point to something about the content that I think is important. The first part is, what do we mean when we say the heart of the Buddha's teaching? If there's these thousands of sutras out there, what does it mean? So in order to tackle that question, I'm going to kind of go into 3 areas. One is, who was the Buddha? Because we have to know where it came from. We have to know something about what the Buddha taught. That's the second. And then the third, it's really important and interesting to know how the teachings of the Buddha actually got to us. Because a different Sangha in a different part of the world may answer the heart of the Buddha's teaching question differently than we will. So I want to address that a little bit. But let's start with who the Buddha is or was. We could talk a lot about who the Buddha was, but I think the most important thing for us in this practice period is to realize that the Buddha was not a god. The Buddha was a human just like you and me. And that's really important. We're not looking at someone who is fundamentally different than us, that taught something that we can't touch. The Buddha is a human being, or was a human being, just like us. The humans suffer, all of us, and the Buddha suffered, just like all human beings. And you all suffer, I suffer. And this is actually why we can enter the heart of the Buddha's teaching. If the Buddha was somehow different from us, how could we enter that heart? But the Buddha isn't different from us. The Buddha was a human being just like us, who lived lives just like us, different in particulars, but the same heart. And that's actually a really lovely thing to know, that the Buddha was just like us. So what the Buddha entered when the Buddha touched the heart of those teachings, you can do too. I can do too. The word Buddha means awakened one. And all of us have the capacity to be awakened ones. The Buddha simply did the work necessary to realize that deep awakening, and then was able to teach that awakening that came down to us. But there was nothing special about the Buddha that is not also true of us. We can do the same thing. Knowing this is a really important Dharma gate. A really important Dharma gate. You are a Buddha to be. You have Buddha nature. The Buddha was a Buddha to be. He had Buddha nature. The only difference between the Buddha and us is that the Buddha did the work to realize his Buddha nature. We're still doing the work to realize our Buddha nature. We're Buddhas to be. But there's no fundamental difference that makes us incapable of that same insight. What did this man, the Buddha, teach? What was it that he taught? So he lived about 2,600 years ago in circumstances somewhat different from ours, but not that different, actually. He was born, his name was Siddhartha, and he was the prince of a kingdom called Sakya in Nepal. And he lived a luxurious life. He had everything he needed. He was protected from suffering. And yet, he wasn't happy. And he saw, when he looked around, when he was able to go outside of this palace that he lived in, he saw that the world was filled with aging, with illness, with death, with loss of everything and everyone that you love, and with karma, with the reality that your actions matter. He saw those things. And he wondered, could I use my privileged position in the world to understand this deeply enough to be able to help people get out of those cycles of suffering that he saw? The Buddha lived in different circumstances, but that sounds an awful lot like us, right? We are people that are among the most fortunate in the world. We have everything we need and more. Everything. We have the capacity to wake up. We have a sangha. We have a community. And yet, just like the Buddha, we aren't very happy. So I don't think we're that different from the Buddha. And even more similarly like the Buddha looked at all this suffering and said, I wonder if I can wake up and help others. And I suspect that that's one of the reasons why you're here. You're wondering, can I wake up? Can I transform this suffering? And in doing that, help others transform their suffering? So the Buddha was born in different circumstances at a different time, but he looks an awful lot like you and me at his heart. The Buddha, as part of his practice period, we could say, decided after trying all of the top teachers and all of the practices in his Hindu world that he lived in 2,600 years ago, he tried all those and nothing quite worked. And so he made this decision that he was going to go and sit under that papala tree right over there, which means really, since a papala tree was a common tree for him, that'd be like us saying, I'm going to sit under that cedar tree until I wake up. I'm not going to walk away from this until I wake up. It's that important. So he's kind of gave himself a practice period, just like we are, a period of intensity. And he sat under that papala tree and he faced his suffering. The way the stories came down to us, they talk about the demons that came to visit him. And really, all they are is his own suffering, his own ideas, his mental formations, as we'd call them. Just like us, right? When we sit down on this cushion, what does our mind do? It puts all our demons right in front of us. But the Buddha stayed with it. And he faced his demons straight on, and he met his demons with love and kindness, and he transformed them into peace and joy. And in doing that, he became the Buddha, the awakened one. He woke up. And you all are doing that too. Every time you come here and sit, a little bit of you wakes up. The Buddha just managed to do it with a level of intensity that is hard for us to generate in our culture of distraction. But it's not unlike what you can do now. So he woke up to the truth of interbeing. The truth of interbeing. And what is that truth? Well, it's something you have to experience for yourself. I could try to put it into words, but it wouldn't matter much. First of all, you probably wouldn't believe me. And second of all, it's the sort of thing that you have to experience. You can't put it into words. Like, for instance, could I put Beethoven's Ninth Symphony into words? No, I couldn't. Could I put the taste of a sun-warmed peach picked right off the tree into words? No, I couldn't. In the same way, we can't quite put into words what the Buddha woke up to, that truth of interbeing. The Buddha realized this, of course. He thought, what do I say? Can I say anything at all? Is anyone going to understand me? And maybe what are they going to do, just throw rocks at me if I try and say this out loud? But he tried. He knew he had to do it. So the first thing he taught, and this is one of the facets of the Dharma that we'll be looking at in this practice period, the first thing he taught was the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths. It is the basis of everything else that the Buddha taught in all his 40 years that he taught. And it comes down to us translated something like this. The first noble truth is that suffering exists. And the second one is that there is a path that leads to that suffering. The third truth is that liberation from that suffering is possible. And the fourth, there is a path that leads to that liberation. I'm kind of moved by the almost scientific nature of that. It's like he's setting up the foundation for what we need to understand in order to build on that and know how that works. I translate it a little differently for myself. This is how I do it, and I encourage you to translate it for yourself as you practice with the Four Noble Truths. I translate it this way. The first one is that human life inescapably has moments of dissatisfaction. I think all of us can recognize that in our lives. We can never escape the dissatisfaction that we have, and no human can. And the second one is that there are causes for that dissatisfaction. And those causes are ignoring the truth, grasping after what we want, and pushing away what we don't want. It's really clear. The third one, but there is luckily a way to transform that dissatisfaction into peace. And the fourth truth is that way is called practicing the Dharma. That's how I translate the Four Noble Truths for myself. As you work with this, you might look for your own way to translate that so that it really speaks your own experience, and not get caught in these philosophical discussions. Well, what does suffering mean? What does liberation mean? That kind of thing. Look to your own life. Translate this for yourself. Well, what makes this noble? They're the Four Noble Truths. What makes it noble? You can look at those truths and, like the first one, suffering exists. That could just be depressing, right? And some people have taken it that way, that they said, well, the Buddha taught that the whole world is just nothing but suffering. Ugh, I want to jump off a bridge, right? What makes these truths noble is that we practice with them. That's the ennobling part. If we don't practice with them, if we just think that the world is a place of suffering, for instance, well, then we'll be hopeless. And there's nothing noble about that statement. Suffering exists. Like, oh. But if we practice with it, if we see the many ways that that is true right in my own life, then that ennobles that truth because it allows us to find liberation. Right? So anytime you hear the noble truths, read, they're noble because I am practicing with them. And if I'm not practicing with them, they lose their nobility. They lose their usefulness. Just a little story about how this worked for me when I was early in my practice. I was insecure. You know, my ego didn't want to come into this Sangha and think I was the one who didn't get anything. And so I often I didn't realize it at the time, but I was often trying to kind of prove to myself and others that I already got it. You know. And I can remember being in a gathering kind of like this, and there had been a Dharma talk, and we were talking afterwards, and we were talking about fear. And these people were sharing their stories of fear, and I was looking around this group thinking, what are these people talking about? I don't feel fear. And I realized later that I was so deep in my suffering that I couldn't even see that my fear was there. So this was the first noble truth for me. Fear exists. Well, I wasn't practicing with it, so there was nothing noble about that for me. But once I started to practice with it and see that so much of what I was doing was based on fear of not being good enough, fears of other people going to think poorly of me, you know, all these kind of things that we all think about. As soon as I started to practice with that and see that, then that first noble truth began to be noble. But until I practiced with it, it wasn't noble at all. It was just a wall I put up that said, suffering, oh yeah, you all are suffering, not me. I'm better than that. Yeah. I really encourage you to always remember as you're working with these noble truths to ennoble them with your practice. Ennoble them with your own experience of them. Look deeply in them. Don't take someone else's word for it. Ennoble them with your practice. let's talk a little bit about how these teachings came to us. So that was what the Buddha did 2,600 years ago. He continued to teach for 40 years after that experience under the papawa tree until he became quite an old man. We're lucky that he had all that time. And he gave talks after talks after talks, and that was an era of oral transmission. And from what I've heard is that some of the people in the Sangha had really good memories. And they remembered what the Buddha said word for word. And they passed those teachings down. So this occurred for 40 years during the life of the Buddha, and then the Buddha died. As so often happens in human endeavor, as soon as the Buddha died, the Sangha had a split. Right? Sangha split into two groups. One group felt that what the Buddha had offered was complete, and that was all that was necessary. And that the practitioners' jobs after the Buddha's death was to preserve those teachings accurately so that we can give them to the next generations. And that group came to be known as the Theravadins. Theravadins. And the Theravadins are dedicated to the slow, gradual, individual pursuit of awakening to become an arhat, and ideally in a monastic setting. So that's one group, the Theravadins. Another group thought, yeah, the Buddha left us really great teachings, and it's not done yet. There are more teachings to come. We can look to our own hearts and look for the teachings there. And they became what's called the Mahayana. And the Mahayana looked not only to the Buddha, but to the other teachers that came after the Buddha, and to themselves, to continue to practice deeply. So these two groups kind of split up and went to different parts of the world. Right? So the practices developed differently in different parts of the world. And you can probably see already that if you ask those two groups what the Buddha taught, they're going to give different answers, especially since in most of the world, those two groups didn't come back together until very recently. Very recently, because it was tough to travel. You just didn't, get much contact between Sri Lanka and Korea, for instance. So those groups split up and had a different idea of what the Buddha's teaching in. So if you asked a Theravadin what the heart of the Buddha's teaching is, they would probably say something like, well, it's contained in the Pali Sutras, it's emphasizing monasticism, and it's emphasizing following the Buddha's teachings precisely. Great stuff, okay. The Mahayanas, if you ask a Mahayana practitioner what the heart of the Buddha's teaching is, they say, well, it's mostly contained in the Sanskrit sutras, which is a completely different language, and they would emphasize direct experience of the Dharma, of our Buddha nature, and they would also follow the Buddha's teachings, but add to that teachings of other teachers throughout history, like the bodhisattvas that have come along, like the other great teachers like Dogen and Hakuin and Joshu and Thich Nhat Hanh. So there would be two different answers about what is the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Now you might ask, where do we fit in? Talked about Theravadins and Mahayana, well, where do we fit in? Well, Plum Village Zen is a Mahayana practice. Zen arose in China in about the 5th century AD, when a monk or monks, Bodhidharma was the monk's name, went from India to China, and Buddhism met Taoism, and that together made Zen. So ours is a Zen practice. That Zen practice came to Vietnam. And our lineage, our Plum Village Zen lineage, it comes from Vietnam, and it was started in the year 1293 when the emperor of Vietnam, Tran Nhan Tong, abdicated the throne and became a monk and started a monastery at the top of Yen Tu Mountain. And I highly recommend, if you have a chance to go. It's really great. It's a tough hike up that hill. It's really something. But you hike through the bamboo forest to get there, and that's why we're the bamboo forest lineage. And that's the lineage that Thich Nhat Hanh brought to the West for us. It's lovely. But there's more to the story. We're not just a Mahayana lineage. Vietnam was positioned on the Silk Road. So where some Buddhist traditions went off to a part of the world and then did not have contact with other Buddhist traditions for centuries or millennia, Vietnam on the Silk Road had practitioners coming through all the time. Mahayana practitioners, Theravadan practitioners. So Vietnam has this mix in our practice, and that has come down to us. If you look at our sutra books, for instance, our sutra books have Mahayana Zen teachings in them. The Heart Sutra, and that's central to Zen practice right there. The Zen poetry that we have in there, the Song of the Grass Roof Hermitage, Tori Zenji Bodhisattva Vow. These are all Mahayana Zen sutras. But we have even more of Theravadan sutras in our sutra book. Anything in that is one of the discourses, that's a Theravadan sutra. Anything that has a list, that's a Theravadan sutra. Anything that has a bunch of numbers is a Theravadan sutra. Anything that starts or contains the words, "Thus the Buddha said," is a Theravadan sutra. So we have this lovely benefit of both of these traditions. And I feel so fortunate that we do. We have nothing to defend. We have nothing to say we've got the right answer and you don't. We get to enjoy all of these teachings. I feel very fortunate about that. The next question, what is actually the heart of the Buddha's teaching for us? I said it would be answered differently in different parts of the world and different traditions. So what is it for us now that we have both of these traditions in us? It's like having two parents. We get them both. So from the Theravadins, we get the Buddha's clear instruction on how to practice. If we go to our sutra book and we look at, for instance, the Sutra on the Full Awareness of Breathing, it is a very detailed and precise direction on how to breathe in our practice. If you do just that sutra, that's enough. That's a lifetime right there. And we get that from the Theravadan side. We get the discourse on happiness from the Theravadan side, the discourse on love. All of these are such a lovely practice that we now do. But we also get the Mahayana emphasis on the direct experience of our own Buddha nature. That is so Zen. That is the heart of Zen. Direct experience of our own Buddha nature. Get rid of all that other stuff, Zen would say. Come back to the direct experience right now of your Buddha nature. In the meditation halls in the monasteries in our tradition, it always has a window above the altar that says mindfulness, concentration, and insight. That is the Zen direction to directly experiencing your Buddha nature. Mindfulness, being aware in this moment, concentration, extending that awareness across time, and insight, the Buddha nature that speaks to you from inside as a result of mindfulness and concentration. So that's clearly Zen that we've gotten from the Buddha and from this marriage. Another thing we've gotten from that Zen side is that Theravadins emphasize more individual awakening, but our Zen side emphasizes that we awaken as a Sangha. We don't awaken as individuals. It's not an individual pursuit. We awaken together. And that's really important. And there's many of these, but the last one I want to talk about that we got from our Zen side is that we take the Bodhisattva vow. That Bodhisattva vow is not the vow for me to wake up. That Bodhisattva vow is that I am here to serve all beings. And if there's a moment when I have a choice to turn to my own benefit or to the benefit of others, I will turn to the benefit of others. That's the Bodhisattva vow, to serve all beings, not just ourselves. And I'm deeply grateful that that has come to us, that that is part of the heart of the Buddha's teaching for us. We are so steeped in individualism in our culture, it's very difficult for us to practice. And the Bodhisattva vow is the direct antidote to that. This is not about me, it's about us. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how to practice with Thay's book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, because that is going to be the focus of our practice period. So I want to talk about the two spirits that we've inherited, the Theravadan spirit and the Mahayana spirit. How do we use both of those in this practice period with Thay's book? So let's talk about Theravadan first. I think what we can do to honor the Theravadan spirit, that spirit that says, the Buddha has given us everything we need, and our job is to practice it precisely and preserve it for future generations. So we can do that with Thay's book. Thay is one of the best interpreters that I've come across of the Dharma. I can't think of anyone else who could have retranslated the Heart Sutra but Thich Nhat Hanh, and actually have it work. It's such a complicated and deep sutra, but Thich Nhat Hanh could translate it. He had that depth of practice and that kind of an authority in his practice. So let's use the Theravadan spirit to respect those words. When Thay writes a book, he writes from the heart of a poet. He sat quietly in his hut and he would listen for his Buddha nature, and he would write what came up in the most concise way possible. And while I give a Dharma talk that has lots and lots of words, Thay could say that in a short stanza, in 3 words. So let's respect Thay's interpretation of the Buddha's teachings in that Theravadan spirit and vow to practice that with integrity. That's how we can uphold our Theravadan side. To uphold our Mahayana side in this practice period, use Thay's words as the voice of the Buddha, but don't stop there. Trust also your own Buddha nature. Trust also what arises for you when you put yourself in contact with Thay's words. Don't take someone else's word for it. Even Thay, even him, don't take his word for it. Let his words come into your heart and then listen to your own heart's response. That's the Zen way. Thay would be very happy if he knew we were doing that. So for Zen practitioners, the heart of the Buddha's teachings includes the Buddha's words, but it includes more. It includes the insights that arise from your own Buddha nature as you are engaging in this practice period. It includes the insights from other teachers, from other traditions, from our ancestors. That's also part of what we honor. And we honor the insights from our current teachers and our peers. In discussions of this book that we're going to study, what you have to say that comes up to you in a discussion period is vitally important. When you have that arise for you to speak, it's not just you that needs to hear that. Someone else in this room also needs to hear that too. and you need to hear their insight. We call that having Sangha eyes. It takes more than just two eyes to see something clearly. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to trust each other as well as the Buddha and the ancestral teachers and the bodhisattvas. We're going to trust each other too. That's one of the ways that we carry out the bodhisattva vow, not to just practice for our personal benefit. When something arises for us, we can become willing to share that with our Sangha. We don't have to worry that it's wrong or that it's incomplete or they're going to laugh at us. No, this is the Sangha's insight arising, and your voice is part of that. Another part of this practice of the bodhisattva vow is that we practice for the benefit of all beings while we do this. And every action we take matters. That's what the fifth of the five remembrances says. It says that every action I take matters. And so that means if we come in this practice period and we practice deeply and well, then the actions that we've taken to do that will create this solid foundation for the whole Sangha, because we're not separate from the whole Sangha. So our practice that is deep gives the power to the people around us at the same time. And the opposite is true. If we neglect to practice deeply and with integrity, we create a weak foundation. And since we're not separate from each other, we have created a weakness for our beloveds around us at the same time. So please, don't just practice for your own benefit. Practice for the benefit of the Sangha. The Sangha needs you to give your whole heart to this practice period. And you can benefit from the Sangha giving its whole heart to the practice period. So that's about all I want to say. I just want to end with kind of what is this tonight? What's the heart of tonight's teaching? And we're talking about the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Well, what's the heart of what we've just been sharing here in this time together? So I would say it's these things. Meet the heart of the Buddha's teaching with your own heart. So that meeting the heart of the Buddha's teaching means you use that Theravadan exactness and respect for the Buddha's words, and you meet that with your own Buddha nature. Another emphasis I hope to have left here tonight is that I encourage us all to bring the historical Buddha alive. The Buddha is not different from you and me. The Buddha experienced a human life, and we are experiencing a human life. So bring the historical Buddha alive here and now in your own heart. Have him be a companion to you. And at the same time, bring your Buddha nature alive. Study the book so that you can learn what the Buddha taught. And as you do that, listen for your own insights. Make your own heart the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Make your own heart the heart of the Buddha's teaching.